behavioral health.
Okay,
Well,
go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. I want to thank all of you participating today here in person or joining virtually for our Sober Living and Recovery Home Task Force meeting. This is our fourth task force meeting in 2024, and if it's your first time joining, thank you for being here. As a reminder, these task force meetings are streamed live, recorded, and made publicly available through our website, www.soberlivingtaskforce.com. My name is Lauren Kleiman. I am Newport Beach City Council member, and I am filling in today for Mission Viejo Council member Wendy Buckman, who normally chairs this meeting. The task force, which was launched in January of 2023, is co-chaired by Council member Buckman, Assembly member Lori Davies, and 5th District Orange County Supervisor Katrina Foley, who are able to join us today, but we are grateful for their service and leadership on this important issue. With that, I also want to acknowledge the partnership with Mission Viejo. We've got representation here today, and they've been really supportive with their resources and also in helping launch our partnership with Chris Murray, who's going to take over at some point as we transition everything over to ACCOC. Review of our task force mission. Since we have new members attending, I'd like to begin by restating our mission before going over the latest progress and updates. The California Sober Living and Recovery Task Force mission is to combine expert education and research, public input, and bipartisan regional ideas and initiatives to determine critical pathways forward for possible short and long-term policy solutions that help those in recovery, as well as community members in neighborhoods that have been impacted. With that said, I'd like to move to updates from the County of Orange. Today we're joined by Peter DeMarco, Director of Legislative Affairs of the County of Orange.
back here, is this okay?
Get on the camera, come on.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, members. My name is Peter DeMarco. I'm the Director of Legislative Affairs for the County Executive Office and for the Board of Supervisors. Supervisor Foley was able to attend today, so she sends her regrets, but wanted to at least make sure that the county update for this that we provided in her absence. Joining me is Charles Dulac. Charles is our Legislative Affairs Manager, works with me and the team. And this is one of the issues that falls under his portfolio. And obviously, from a legislative standpoint, this is something that we've all been obviously been working very, very closely on. In terms of the county, what I would say is I'm going to ask Charles to kind of give an update on the legislation that we've done. But, we are beginning the process of our 2-year legislative platform that we will take to the board in December for final approval and adoption. This is the foundation of all of the county's legislative advocacy that we will be conducting over the next 2 years. There are a number of, obviously, a lot of it is just in terms of operations and things that impact the county's business. But clearly, I think that this issue has continued to be one at top of mind of this board, and currently and expect that to continue going forward. So I expect that we will continue to highlight the issue and continue to restate the board's priorities. And I don't need to go through all, you all know them right now, but that will be an ongoing process. I do think that, generally speaking, Corliss and I and Chris and a few others around here, we've been kind of been fighting this for a while, but I do think that there's an opportunity from now in the beginning of the year to figure out how we can change the story, because despite everyone in this room here, collective efforts and those that aren't here, there's still this perception and it's just not reality. So I do think there's an opportunity to reframe the issue for the legislature and the governor over the next couple of years. There are more specific examples of things why some sort of comprehensive solution needs to happen. And I know that Supervisor Foley has been a passionate advocate for these reforms. And so I would say that we are looking forward to continuing to work with this task force and its members on seeing what sort of comprehensive legislative proposals are feasible and how can we work together to continue that work. So with that, Charles, do you want to come over and just do a quick update on legislation from the counties we're working on?
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Charles Dulac, CEO of Legislative Affairs. The county, the board has taken support positions, actually has sponsored one of them. Legislative. These are two Senate bills that the board voted to take support positions on. Both of those bills failed to move outside of they failed deadlines in Sacramento. So we haven't had as much luck on the Senate side. There's two Assembly bills, Assembly Bill 2081, which is a Davies bill, and Assembly Bill 2574. Both of those bills the board chose to take support positions on. We provided letters and support and testimony in support of those bills throughout the process. Those currently are on the Senate floor, and we expect votes on those bills within the next 2 weeks. So we have floor alerts that we'll be sharing with the members of the California Senate, expressing the board's support of both of those bills. Happy to answer any questions. Peter, if there are any.
Are there any questions in the room for Peter?
Yeah, what is it, the Davies bill, what does it look like as far as support? Have you been able to line up any support towards it, or where do we look? How do we look on that?
Yes, there has been good support for the for 2081, the Davies bill. I do not believe that opposition on either one of these bills is current. I think there may have been some, but amendments throughout the process have removed opposition on both of those bills. So expect them to continue moving forward in their current forms.
Was the Davies bill watered down?
Yeah, a little bit. I would say that the iterations, every single one of these bills, as they're introduced, they take amendments throughout the process. That's what happens up in Sacramento. To get buy-in from other stakeholders, you have to be willing to bring their perspectives into those bills, make sure that they get those votes going forward. These bills have done that successfully. I'd say sometimes you see bills that are watered down so significantly, the authors will refuse to move them forward. That hasn't been the case here.
From any attendees
You have one question from Gina Posey.
I don't know if there's a way to fix that.
Let's see.
What is the question?
Gina Posey asked if you could just restate your comments right prior to AB 2081.
Regards to AB 21, Gina, or just the comments about each one of the bills that we were looking at? I think the clarification would help. Well, as far as 2081 goes, the The bill has been reduced in scope from when it was originally introduced. It still advances the issue as far as the board is concerned. And so we're continuing to take support positions on that bill as it moves through the Senate floor right now. Hopefully that answers your question.
And we will provide a recap to you in the reporting out of the meeting, plus this is being recorded dually, so we have a separate recording with additional backup mics. So if you missed a report and you're online, we will make the full recording available on the website.
Hear that? Recorded, and if you missed something, you can certainly watch it back at a later date. Thank you so much for the work being done at the county level on this. We're extremely appreciative of Foley. Is there a comment from someone online? No. Okay. Now I'd like to move on to updates regarding the state legislative. This is by Lisa Arcidiano. Hopefully you can start by correcting my pronunciation. Townsend Public Affairs, and Janelle Atienza with Assemblymember Diane Dixon's office, who actually requested the audit of DHCS and its role in the licensing and regulation of sober living homes. Lisa, can you give us an update here?
Good afternoon, everybody. Elisa Arcidiacono with Townsend Public Affairs. I hate to be redundant. I know that we discussed a couple of the bills in the sober living home space already. I do want to note that Caroline Grinder from the League of California Cities is also on the line. They are sponsoring both of those bills, and so she can answer any questions or give any additional details. We'll let you all know that we are in what is now called a time of end of session. We are moving through the bills on the appropriation suspense file today. And next week, the next 2 weeks rather, the Assembly members and the senators will be on the floor every day, all day long, voting on bills, trying to get them all out of their houses and on the governor's desk. I will note that the appropriation suspense hearings is where a fair amount of bills go to die. And so we imagine that the list of bills that we are tracking will dwindle a little bit after today. One of those bills, what was that? Just one last thing from me. One bill I did want to note, because I know it has come up in conversations prior, and this one is on the Senate suspense file, is AB 2893 by Assembly members Ward and Haney. Deals in the space of recovery residences. I know that there were some points of opposition made in meetings past. This one is, of course, going to define what a supportive recovery residence is. And that is going to include folks who are experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness and who also have a substance use disorder. It's going to require that they utilize Housing First components. They need to utilize substance use specific peer support. They've got an emphasize abstinence in utilizing drugs. And lastly, they need to offer permanent housing. I know that in this space, we talk a lot about transitional housing, and this bill is intended to create a different pathway for maybe folks who might need additional support. I see your comment, Lori. I know that you have some grief with this bill. What I will note is that the language is rather permissive. It does set standards for bringing folks into compliance with the state, but there is nothing that prohibits the counties from including some more stringent rules in order to have this housing locally. So it doesn't force any county to move in this direction. It just gives the option. And of course, if folks in Orange County decide that they do not want to move in this direction, they do not want to legitimize this type of housing, that is certainly your prerogative. So just wanted to note that that bill is again on the Senate suspense file today. And so we will hear the fate of that one any minute. And with that, I'll pass it back to the group.
Thank you so much. Lori, do you have anything you want to say? We go to the update on the JLAC audit. She on the call? She is. Thank you, Lori.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that I couldn't, we on the, on computers are struggling to hear, we're kind of picking up every other second of what people are saying. We had a letter into the Health Committee and we had a letter into the Appropriations Committee about how badly, how poorly written this bill is. I will say that I met with someone very involved with this bill in proposing and or supporting this bill, and they did not understand that this bill is not for people who have committed to sobriety. The bill specifically says you cannot basically people should be actively using, and you shouldn't have any judgment about whether they're using or not. That's what the bill language actually says. The people involved thought it had and required a commitment to recovery. I'm happy to send our letter to anyone that wants to see it if this bill moves on, because the bill is a disaster, all for lots of reasons. And I'm not just saying it's like, oh, I'm trying to be hysterical about it. It is simply an extremely poorly written document that, quite honestly, nobody has really read, because they would not have passed it as far as they have if anyone had actually read it.
Okay. Move on. Thank you again, Elisa and Lori.
I did want to add, there is one other item for the agenda, and that is just a quick update from Chris Murray with ACCOC regarding the Kaslar Foundation before she departs.
Oh, sure. Okay, we'll quickly divert and hear from Chris Murray from ACCOC.
Well, first, I'd like to begin by thanking Councilwoman Kleiman for stepping in and chairing today. Really gracious of you, and thank you for your leadership. I have to unfortunately step out just shy of 2:30 today for a very important meeting got scheduled for us at 2:30, and I really didn't have a lot of control over the timing of that. So just thank you. As far as the Kaslar update, I'll be brief. One, I want to open by also acknowledging Steve Franks, the city manager of Villa Park, who's joining us today. His council voted unanimously to support the task force, both financially and with the resources of him and his team. So thank you for that, and thank you for being here today. Bill Curley, I don't know if he's on with us today. The legal counsel of counsel for Mission Viejo has finalized the paperwork for our 501c3 filing. So that'll be moving ahead, and then we'll be getting the bank account set up and other transition process in place so that ACCOC can contract with our newly established 501c3 for Kaslar and provide some managerial and financial support to the organization as we grow and really work to fulfill the mission objectives of the task force. So with that, those are our two big updates right now, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Chris Murray before we move on? Anyone in the room to start? Anyone online? Okay, thank you so much. We're excited about the transition and also appreciate all of the collaborative efforts and support Mission Viejo and beyond. We'll turn it over to Janelle from Townsend.
Hi everybody, I'm Janelle on behalf of Assemblymember Diane Dixon's office, and I just want to thank everyone for being here and participating in this meeting. Last month, Assemblymember Dixon held a small legislative solutions workshop on this topic. Thank you to Councilmember Kleinman for attending and all the other individuals who participated as well, and a special thank you to Lori Durand. Assemblymember Dixon is exploring a couple of possible legislative ideas to ensure businesses operating in a residential zone are licensed and that regulations are in place to ensure people who need treatment are getting the help that they need. As for the JLAC audit, the audit is still publicly listed on the state auditor's website with a fall completion date, and the state auditor's office confirmed with our office that they are still on track as of now. Moving forward, the Assembly member is looking forward to the DHCS audit and may be considering an audit of facilities under DSS next session.
Thank you for that update. Does anyone have any questions about the JLAC audit at this time? Ryan, have any questions?
and ask questions? Hi, my name's Steve McNally. I'm on a behavioral health advisory board, but I'm here as a community member. You said a DHCS audit
So, yes.
in addition to the state auditor's audit? Two audits?
That's the audit. Yeah, and then right now, and then,
Same audit?
yes, and then next year, she's looking forward to working with DSS for an audit next session possibly. It's not confirmed right now, but.
When the audit's completed, what do you expect it to help you do? Because I read through the description of it and I was just sort of broadly written.
Just to look at all the data of the different facilities in the areas and what they do. We can't
How are you?
disclose what they're asking for, but
I do, yeah, what's up?
Because the Department of Healthcare Services has a mapping tool they released.
Right. Yeah, I don't know
Um,
much about it other than she needs some real estate
locations.
attorney.
And the Open Data Portal has a lot of the locations, so
She's an acquaintance. Not,
guessing that you
yeah,
all
like,
pulled
yeah,
that
is something
down
wrong
and
with it
know
or
how to
anything else?
find it,
yeah,
Okay.
anything remember knows.
including boarding cares and all that.
Yeah, so Steve, actually, I know you've been to some of our events in
Yeah.
Newport Beach and mentioned the same thing. I actually think I followed up with you to get more information about that. I'm personally not familiar with that database. Is there a specific website where those?
Uh,
can be found?
well, Janelle, you don't want to ever get reading glasses. She could help you or I could help you. You can find it and then what you can do is you can sign up for it. I think one thing is that everybody wants to get rid of bad operators. But even the people who want to police the bad operators are having a lot of difficulty getting support in Sacramento. You know, that federal lawsuit that just, the federal thing that came down a couple of months ago, it was a long time in the making. So I don't know, this is a different topic, but figuring out a way to encourage people, to empower them to clean up their own industry would be helpful because they are upset about it, the people that are mission driven. But I will show you, so no problem.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or comments about the JLAC audit? Anyone online?
Yes,
Okay. Thank you
Yes.
for those updates,
this is
Janelle.
Laura Curran. I raised
Next
my,
up, we're going to have Jason Ivins. Oh, sorry, we do have a question online.
hello, this is Laura Curran.
Laura Curran from Newport Beach.
This is Laura Curran from Newport Beach. The purpose of the audit was generated by myself and other residents working with the city council members
Not
and
having any luck with technology today.
Laura, we're having some difficulty with the audio still in the room. If you could please type your question out and then we will follow up on that question. Our apologies. We now can not hear anyone in the room. They can hear us. Okay.
Hopefully they can hear us.
Hopefully.
Now,
Yeah, so I can hear it. I'm joined in as a participant.
okay.
Let me
So
call.
for some reason, we're having difficulty with the speakers in our room, so we'll come back to your question.
Okay, we'll come back to you, Laura. Again, in the meantime, we will go to Jason Ivins, Chief of Police Services for the City of Mission Viejo, who will provide a law enforcement update. And again, thank you so much for your partnership and all of your time and efforts with us on this. Turn it over to
Having me. Good afternoon. At the last meeting, I spoke about trying to determine a workload, how much workload Silver Living Homes are taking away from us actually doing police work in the city of Mission Viejo. And I'm not going to take credit for it. One of my office specialists, actually the trainee, actually went on and scrubbed our computer-assisted dispatch system to find out where all these calls are coming from. And I didn't tell him to go back too far. I only had to go back 2 years. But we were able to put together a map and a list of calls that we had that from unlicensed facilities in the city of Mission Viejo with a total of 334 calls for service in the last 2 years. So what that takes away from our patrol on calls that are not just regular calls for a party call. These are actually calls, a lot of them are overdoses that are taking away the time from the deputies actually going out and looking for real criminals. I was able to put together a map using our Peregrine system, and I would like maybe at the next meeting figure out how to share it on the big screen. Right now, I'm not able to. I have to do it on a GIS map instead. But it's pretty interesting how the calls have clustered in certain areas of our city. And I think if we push this out countywide, people will be able to, if I show the metrics at which we pulled the information from our CAD, it would get easier for each city if they want to track where their personnel are spending their time and how much effort they're putting forth in these areas. Other than that, that's all I've done for the last month is map this stuff. So, like I said, the spreadsheets are all done by my office specialist, and he did a great job. So, for a 20-year-old kid. So.
It sounds like an incredible undertaking. Can you talk a little bit more about what it is that you're looking for? I don't know if those around the room or online saw the call to action. We in Newport Beach got a call from the auditor's office asking about public safety and whether this was a drain on resources and asking for some of this information. And truthfully, we had a hard time really pinning it down and tried to work with the data system that we have in place, which isn't necessarily set up for, obviously we can do a search by an address if we have it, if we know it's operating as this type of facility, but there may be other addresses we're not familiar with, or there may be other effects around the address that we're not able to directly search for, or other types of things that are happening in that surrounding neighborhood that may be tied to that operating facility, but how do we get to that? So can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I was running into the same problem. So when we were going back through the CAD, and that's why I asked for help with this, is if we identify a location that's unregistered, unlicensed, sober living, recovery house, halfway house, whatever, it's easy, right? You put in that address and you can see calls for service. But a lot of these calls are disturbing the peace calls, trespassing calls, overdose calls in the neighborhood. So I was scrubbing the entire street and seeing if this overdose was happened to be related to the recovery home. It may have happened down the street. It may have happened across, in a parking lot across from the residence, where if we just put in the address, it wouldn't come up with anything. But we are going back and looking at calls in the area, whether it's disturbing the peace, people standing out smoking in their neighbor's yard, trespassing. We had to go back, and this was not an easy task. This took him probably 2 weeks of just going back and looking at calls. I don't know a better way to, as far as our CAD system, to get the information to be able to put it on a spreadsheet, put it on a map. I don't know.
That was going to be my next question. So looking backward, it may be harder to find the information, but is there a way to implement a data collection system that makes it easier for law enforcement to track these calls and effects on the surrounding neighborhood?
With the mapping program I'm using, you can put a radius around or a diameter around the residence, and you can pick up calls, similar calls in that area. So, and that's kind of what we were working on. It really helped because I was able to go, okay, that call has nothing to do with the house. This one does. And then I also reached out to Orange County Fire because a lot of times they're getting calls that we're not, especially the overdoses. And they're going there, deploying Narcan, taking people to a hospital, and we have no clue. The sheriff's department was never called because it was a medical emergency. not a law enforcement thing.
When I look at the calls for service, I see a lot of medical aid, no law enforcement response,
Yes.
which could be anything, but could certainly be an overdose.
Yeah, I did count those into our survey.
And then do you know if there's any conversations being had between the law enforcement agencies in Orange County or beyond about, best practices in this area that we could work together to try to figure out how to make it a little bit easier so that we do have this data going forward?
So I've only talked to the cities, the sheriff's department contract cities on the east side of the freeway with me, Ranch Santa Margarita, Lake Forest. I told them, hey, I'm working on this. If you guys want to join in, but I have not talked to any other cities, no.
Madam Chair, just another update for you on that. Our team has been in communication with the mayor of Costa Mesa and received follow-up from Ron Lawrence, who's the chief of police services there. So we're engaging city police departments as well outside of the sheriff's department so that we can bring all those agencies together and make sure that there's a unified collection and reporting system for the purposes of the data we're all seeking. And the city of Costa Mesa did receive a Public Records Act request for the data, just like we did with the sheriff's department, and we're working with them to continue to gather additional data. So one thing that
I think
Chris,
that was my public record
that was
request.
your PR, right? And they mentioned it to us, right?
Yeah.
And, so I think they ended up getting a couple of PRAs, and so we did get outreach from them and reminding them about this meeting. So they're aware of it. So we'll work with you after this meeting to talk about how to help them hone in on the data you really want. But they did acknowledge that, although they're not here today, we appreciate them being responsive. And something that Chris Marie and I talked about is going to the Police Chiefs and Sheriffs Association so that we can further address this issue.
Do we know if that data that I know the sheriff's department has worked very hard on getting us, has that been turned over to the auditor's office for this? I hate for them to have spent all the time and then it doesn't make its way to where it needs to go.
I believe some of the data that was collected was provided to them while they were receiving data for the audit.
Okay, maybe we follow up and
We'll
just
follow up.
make sure. Thank you. Chief, do you have anything else that you wanted to add?
Anybody else have any questions?
Any questions around the room?
Hi, everybody. Just doing an audio check.
Captain Ivins,
You can hear
and
it.
you're doing some quick math here. It looks like, 334 calls in 2 years. Your guys are going out and responding to this type of call every other day. So that's kind of rough math, but pretty close. There's so you're saying that the medical calls, the fire department calls are included in this number?
Yes.
Okay. So there's this, in sales, there's this old rule called the 80-20 rule, which means you get 80% of your business from 20% of your customers. So if you look at that from a perspective of law enforcement, what were the highest, maybe 2 or 3 reasons that officers had to respond to, or I guess you'd have to include medical in this, or fire department as well. So just give us an idea of the type of challenges that you're facing, please.
Most of the calls were disturbing the peace calls. I would say more than half were disturbing the peace calls.
Wow.
So, yeah. It's neighbors calling in saying, hey, there's this house across the street and they're making noise or they're smoking in the front yard, and we go out, we respond to every call we get that comes across our dispatch center. So we don't, say that's not a crime, we're not showing up. We show up to everyone. So.
Is there a collective impact to that number of disturbances in any one neighborhood?
To be honest with you, I thought the number was gonna be higher. 334 for 2 years, I didn't think that was a crazy number. But it still takes time away. Right?
Do you see the numbers coming down? Are people becoming complacent or maybe, sort of given up on calling?
I have noticed the numbers were coming down because we had a lot less calls last year than we have in the previous.
Other question? Someone?
Just doing an audio check. Is anybody able to hear us online?
Yes,
We can hear you now, so the speakers are back in the room. So when you're ready to call on board.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love the approach of empowering the other departments. So my question is, are you all on pretty similar data systems? Or are there a certain number of systems like?
For outside agencies or?
Yeah, like, so let's say Ron Lawrence, he's a really good guy in Costa Mesa. So he says, yeah, I want to do it. Is he going to follow the same instructions for that work for you?
I don't know if Costa Mesa uses that paragraph.
Okay, so maybe there's, because empowering others to do the job is really important, and also how the data gets, what data you could use to get in your system, because there's data all over the place. People just don't really look at it. They complain that there is no data, but they don't ever really spend the time to find it. And so overlaying or putting some things together, because hopefully you would get to pinpoint a street or an area where there's a lot of activity, like heavy utilizers or heavy, and then we could address trying to fix each of those problems or see how many of them there are.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, everybody's going to use their own metrics on what they're looking for. So I just asked to look for certain types of calls.
Okay.
I mean, there's stuff I could have missed, but based on the types of calls these residences generated, that's what I went off of to begin with, and that's how the information I pulled from.
And last question, do law enforcement use similar codes? Like would a sheriff in a county use similar codes to the police?
All the Orange County agencies use the same codes.
Perfect. That makes that'll eliminate an issue. Terrific.
I have a question. I don't know if this is possible, but having an understanding of databases, I don't know if you guys do this. Is there any way to set up a central database? Let's say your department, medical department, and then you take one element out of the database and you make that an index. You can have multiple indexes within a database. Then having an index, let's say an overdose. Let's say if that is indexed in your database, then cross-reference that, let's say with a medical. Then you can actually pinpoint it back to where the incident happened. And then you can, that incident triggers another database to collect data at that point. Do you guys have anything like that?
We don't. The state does with CLETS. They collect data that way, but not all this is fed into CLETS.
And then that brings me back to the question of the audit. Because I don't know if this is happening in an audit, but if the audit drills down and have these facilities to disclose their medical crisis, let's say an overdose, then that can actually be put back into another database that actually populates the other databases. Basically have the databases do the work of the individuals and then let it compile at that point. And what that does, that alleviates our officers having to go out instead of doing the bad guys, go out and address the overdoses. Because now you know where those overdoses are happening. Now you can actually try and facilitate a way to manage that, because having an overdose and having an officer keep showing up at a facility for something like that is ridiculous because it comes out of the taxpayers' money. And so now you're burdening not only our heroes, you're burdening the population, okay, for a facility that shouldn't be where it is, and not that no one wants it, but what happens, now you have a person, creating another problem that has to have another database that you actually have to pull that data from. When there's a system in place, you just have to build it. And the sheriff's department, the police department, they have a database. The medicals have a database. Now, with the exception of HIPAA laws, there is a way to collect the data. We're just not being, I'm not gonna say smart, we're not implementing the tools and designing it, because that's what databases do. They're very powerful tools if you architect them correctly. Now, what I'm hearing from the captain, Ivan, is that they have a database, but they're scrubbing that database. Okay, when you scrub a database, you have to ask yourself, what are you leaving out? Important things could be scrubbed that shouldn't be scrubbed. And if you had another database that collected that, then that becomes a very powerful tool, because now you have the scrub database, but you also have a reference database. So why aren't we thinking that way? And allowing technology to help us with our jobs, to help us actually manage situations that require physical beings. Well, technology runs 24/7 and it doesn't get tired. It doesn't ask for breaks. So that's how I see us actually should be thinking that way, because it'll alleviate, having to put bodies and resources there.
Well, and I think the other thing, identifying overdoses in particular, I know, Lori, you have some good information on the ADA, and I'm thinking about state licensing in particular. I know you talked about unlicensed facilities, but when the state licenses a 6 and under facility, those people are supposed to be free of drugs and alcohol completely in order for that to be protected under the ADA and the Fair Housing Act and all these things. So when you talk about a call for a drug overdose, that seems like an immediate response from the DHCS. These people are not sober, therefore they are not covered by the ADA. Therefore, the city should be able to go in, we should have sort of a response system to that. Because I always was so concerned, we're talking about overdoses in businesses and neighborhoods. That's a medical crisis. So I think the overdose in particular is the one that we really need to identify. And I think we can turn into, some kind of action, whether it's rooted back into our new laws for next year or taking a look at, legal pathways. But Lori, do you have any comment about active drug use in state licensed facilities or unlicensed facilities?
At the moment, the state has set up a rule that says that if someone overdoses or relapses on a property, the property is required to keep them on the property. So the emphasis in the past had always been to be strictly sober people on the property, people detoxing, so they're no longer using drugs. But because the state has enabled that, it's plausible that the loophole for that sort of creates this strange situation between the state and the city, but it would suggest that they are not in recovery, they are not recovered, and because of that, addicts who use illicit substances are not covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. So their rights to fair housing certainly would not fit into place the way the industry likes to position to municipalities it does.
Yeah, so I think that's a good place to probably come back to. Maybe the chief can work with some of the other law enforcement agencies around the county to tackle this. Certainly Mr. Fowler had some great ideas, but this was the thought when we got that call from the auditor's office asking questions, was that not just the volume, the number of calls for service, but the types of calls, things that would in fact indicate that these individuals are not in fact sober, or that indicate that there's some negligence or other things going on the properties. I know we do need to move on in the interest of time. I want to come back to Laura Kern's question, unless there's any other questions online for the chief or regarding the law enforcement discussion.
If I could just make a brief statement. And this is something I don't need Jeff nor Lori to respond to, but I think that the key element here and what this discussion has brought up is the fact that what is it that our legislators need to move forward? So we have these bills, we got 2083, we got 3037, 2413, all these bills that we have. So why is it that our legislators are not able to move these bills forward? And to me, my perspective is that data that we need, that the Sheriff's Department and all law enforcement and fire authorities need to provide to us to really prove and put some teeth into the assembly bills and the bills that we're trying to move forward to try to regulate this industry. Is that in fact the weak link? And is it part of this task force job to identify those weak links and try to understand how to move forward? Because we're going to be talking about legislative affairs for the next 10 years. If we're not doing something that we need to do to move those bills forward, we're not doing our job.
Just quickly, Alvaro Nunez, City of Santa Ana, and I think it goes more to the point that the captain mentioned. You said it, Mr. Campbell, there's no delineation in the data component, right? because we're not even obligating, whether you call them licensed or unlicensed, them to identify any cost for services. You're never gonna have a cross-sectional component across the county, because like you said, his cost for service is not response to a sober living house or recovery center. His cost us what? Overdosing. We're not gonna put that because it's not required. It's disturbing the peace, right? They typically is law enforcement responses on the cause that they monitor, right? An assault, a fight. There's no connection to the fact that it's a recovery home or sober living aspect. So until there's a requirement, even from the state, because you're right about the data, we can track the ones that are licensed and non-licensed, the over the 6 and under the 6. We can look at the database, but so what? We can identify, but we can't take any type of action that is critical to point out those violations, right? Whether it be law enforcement or court enforcement. So where's the obligation then from the legislation bill to say, okay, if the first track is we can't prohibit them and the city can impose local, whether it be the county or the local jurisdiction, impose restrictions, then at least say, hey, like the ADA requirement, we had a call for service, report it. Or with the county public health official, what does it matter? PD had to come, sheriff had to come to my house because our folks were fighting. That's it, right? An overdose, right? A medical call. Something that says, look, there's something happening for oversight, for maintenance, not adequate services. And then we can start tracking, like Mr. McKinley said, the bad actors, right? Because there's no connection, right? We can ask the Federal Police Department, the local sheriffs, and they're gonna do calls for services, typical calls in public urination. So what, right? Fighting, so what? Overcrowding, so what? At night, thefts, robbery, near the house, 100 feet from the house. But unless you make a connection to the actual location and the business component, we're good or bad, under 6, over 6, licensed or unlicensed. Look at the commentary we say. We literally say licensed or unlicensed, knowing full well that under 6, there's no requirement. Not even as a rental property, let's put it that way. So when we use even that term, we're making our own legacy and saying we're literally not being ineffective because we're using our own argument. Licensed versus unlicensed, knowing full well that we're not changing that part of the aspect. Right? Who has to license themselves? Over 6. Any under 6? Not even a business license, the minimum. A business license to say, look, we identify in our city, in our county. You can't even do that. So we need to speak, at least say, look, where's our handicap? Where's the missing point? And at least identify those. This is the irony. To at least even on the data component mixed that we can say we can identify the proper ones. We can't even do that yet.
Yeah, so obviously there's no requirement. That's sort of the whole reason we're all here. There are very little requirements across the board for these properties at all. And to Councilmember Campbell's question or point, that's what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to shine some light on this as an issue. And with the JLAC audit, we're trying to provide that information to the auditor's office. And because they opened the door, because it actually wasn't part of the initial scope itself, but because the auditor reached out and started asking those questions about the data, we can now provide the information. And we know,
and not to interrupt, excuse me, but more to Mr. Campbell's point. So legislative mandate, what should we ask the legislators? Allow them to at least request a business license with local jurisdictions. Why not? Identify. 1, 2, 3, 4 South Main, here's my business. That's it, minimum.
well, and hopefully your mayor, I understand, she's interested and activated on this issue. So hopefully she'll get more involved and, can help us get in front of legislators on this issue. But again, the goal in all of these efforts is to compile all of this information that we know, everyone around the table we know, but maybe the legislators don't. So the purpose of these efforts is to compile that information, put it in front of the auditor's office, and then hopefully get the attention of legislators so that we can then introduce some of these bills. I think, from my perspective anyway, we've been coming at it from what they would consider to be the NIMBY perspective, the impacts to the surrounding neighborhoods, and not for the protection of the individuals who are seeking care. And all of these discussions that we're having about these calls for service are relating to, as I said before, negligence or lack of safety if people are overdosing, or as we know in several of our cities, worse, some pretty tragic things that have happened. With that, I want to move on again. I think we're running out of time here. Quickly, I want to get back to Laura's question, and then we'll have to get to the next item on our agenda. Laura, have you given up, or do you still want to ask your question? I think it related to the audit. Maybe not. Okay.
We do have her question in writing,
Oh, we do. Okay.
so we will follow up and respond to that question.
Okay. Good. We'll get back to you, Laura, offline. Okay. Thank you for all of the input. It's a good discussion. That's exactly what we want to happen here. Before we close today, we wanted to share a very important video that drives home why we are doing the work that we're doing to address this issue. It's important. In some cases, unfortunately, tragically, a matter of life and death. We all know the impact that improperly managed and unregulated sober living homes can have on communities and neighborhoods. We hear about it every day from our constituents. The other side of that coin are the negative consequences on unsuspecting and vulnerable patients who are suffering from addiction and or mental health issues and are being taken advantage of and abused by a failed system, as we were just talking about now. We have this video we want to share. It's the story of Brandon Nelson.
One of the largest rehab and behavioral health companies in the country, Sovereign Health, headquartered in Orange County.
The business closed about a year after this FBI raid that included Sovereign's treatment facilities, its San Clemente headquarters, and Tanmoy Sharma's home here in San Juan Capistrano.
We were told was a licensed facility by Department of Health Care, and it was all lies. Brandon was a terrific kid, smart, fun, athletic, and very caring, very sensitive. Unfortunately, he had a mental illness and he had a psychotic break, and long story short, ended up at a rehab called Sovereign in Orange County, which we were told they would have medical help and psychologist and psychiatrist and everything he needed. When they recommended Sovereign, I went onto the website. It said, we treat mental illness. We have homes for mental illness. We have a psychiatrist that comes in every day. We have equine, therapy, with the horses. We go to the beach. We have group therapy. He was basically there 2 days, ended up with a 5250. Went to Mission Hospital, Providence, he was supposed to be there for 14 days. They released him back to Sovereign, and 24 hours later, he took his life.
They had a group session there, and there was a question that was asked that if you could be an animal, what would you like to be? Well, Brandon was in aerospace. He loved flying. He said, I want to be a bird, I want to fly, and I want to go into the military. One of the other guys that was in this group session said, well, that's never going to happen. I was in the military. Now you got this mental problem and you're not going to be able to go into the force. So Brandon went up to his room and there was a fire sprinkler hanging down, and he took the drawstring from his sweatpants and he hung himself.
911, what is your emergency?
Someone just hung themselves right here.
And he never got his medication that he was promised. So he went through basically withdrawal.
There's no vetting that happens, very, very little oversight. And these fraudsters understand this. And that's how they've moved in. They know how to exploit the insurance companies for insurance money. But what makes this all possible is DHCS and DSS allow this treatment to happen inside residential houses.
On the day of my son's service, I get a call from Sovereign on my cell phone. Is Brandon Nelson there? We need to talk to him about his insurance. I said, my son's dead on your watch. They had no idea. They're looking for his insurance payment. That's how these rehabs are. And we come to find out this is not an isolated situation. This happens all the time. The mental health system should do is involve the family, and they don't. They cut you out.
And the legislature doesn't seem to be a real interest in trying to do anything, but I think it's the type of thing, and until it happens to one of their kids, they'll tweak things around the edges, but in terms of making meaningful change, unfortunately, I just don't see it happening.
I can tell you this right now, my son would be alive if the Department of Healthcare Services would have regulated places like this. These people running these businesses, it is a factory. And the problem is, these rehabs are not only bad for the people in them, but bad for the neighborhoods who are dealing with the people in there because they're helpless. It's broken, and everyone knows. Mental illness, addiction, the country, the federal government, no one's waking up to these problems. It affects families, and you are vulnerable, and my heart goes out to a lot of these people, and I have so many friends going through this, and it's really tough.
I want to thank Mr. and Mrs. Nelson for being willing to share their story, as difficult as I'm sure it is. All of our hearts go out to them, their tragic loss of their son. But this really kind of puts into perspective why we're here, the meaningful reform that we are working towards and is so desperately needed. And the Nelsons are joining us today. Do we know if they want to?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me? Alan Nelson?
Hi, I'm here also.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, it's Alan. Thank you to Venture Strategic, Jeff Corliss and Peter Dorsch, Sam Hassan for coming up and letting us speak. Little bit of background here. We knew nothing about how the mental health system worked. From the time Brandon had his psychotic break until he took his life was less than 8 weeks. We've seen every part of the mental health system in California. It's totally broken. We knew nothing, and when we were told that this place was licensed, we think, oh, okay, well, it's a license. We knew nothing about the difference between Department of Public Health, which has real licenses, and he was in a place called Las Encinas and then Mission Laguna. He was in those two places along with Sovereign. In there, we would never have had to worry about him taking his life. We did not understand that these DHCS and DSS license places have very little vetting, limited oversight. And like we said in there, the fraudsters know how to take advantage of this. And really, we have set up a shadow mental health system inside residential neighborhoods. It shouldn't be there. You're getting all of these what economists call externalities with the disturbances and all the other stuff that you're trying to get the statistics of in your arms around. Well, look, there's a real simple way to solve this, which of course the government probably won't, but they should not allow this in residential neighborhoods. We've got billions of dollars coming in from Proposition 1. Let's set up detox facilities. Let's set up mental health facilities that are overseen by DPH. Let's get rid of this nonsense of trying to provide medical services out of residential homes. It's ludicrous. It's just a totally ludicrous idea. So anyway, that's our perspective. If anybody else has it, we're perfectly willing to help. We'd love to get up to Sacramento and tell all of Brandon's stories, because we certainly have problems with the DPH facilities and the insurance companies where they were just trying to get him out of there as soon as possible. And anyway, thank you for letting us present our story. And again, we just need to get this shadow mental health system out of the residential communities and into properly licensed and regulated facilities overseen by the Department of Public Health. Rose, do you have something you'd like to say?
The only thing we didn't touch on, the only reason they're in business is to make a profit. That's all they're there for.
They're not there to help anyone. They're really there to make money insurance is paying or it's private pay. And I talk to people all the time. I was just at a luncheon with another woman who lost her son in a sober living facility. And, you know, when you're making $30,000 a month and each of those clients have to pay that, which they call clients, look at these operators, how much they're making. Of course, they're going to be in a beautiful home in San Clemente or Mission Viejo or Santa Monica. And it's got to stop. It's just, this is not a profitable industry. You're dealing with very vulnerable people and a vulnerable community.
Both for sharing your story and for your advocacy in your son's name.
Yes, and we'd also like to thank a few people, Carolyn Johnson at KNBC TV4, who has been an advocate, you know, for us and against these rehabs. Lori Giron, who has just really helped educate us about how these different industries or departments regulate, and a lot about the legislation, and really also Terry Savorsa at the Orange County Register, who I know has been a tireless advocate for you down there and continues to punch away at this, and certainly is advocating for getting hospital-like services for these vulnerable people and getting them out of the residential homes as well. So thanks to those people, and I know there's many others who are working on this, and if we can help any of the other efforts, you're always free to reach out to us, and we're willing to speak. We also have, from the lawsuit we have all of the depositions, and that group counselor I was telling you about had absolutely no business running a group session, wasn't licensed to do so. And so that's the other thing. DHCS, they don't do any background checks of any sort on the people who are in here providing the services. So that's yet another issue.
Thank you. And yes, I would echo compliments and kudos to Terry Sforza and also Lori for their great work on this issue. Okay, we'll bring this meeting to a close. Before I do that, a message from Chair Bucknam. I want to reiterate the standard of volunteer assignment to each and every person participating in today's meeting, should you choose to accept. Our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, December 5th, and her request is that you invite a new participant, elected official, jurisdiction, and/or resident to attend with you. In less than 2 years since the task force was formed, we've created great momentum and attracted widespread participation across the region. The way that we continue that momentum and ensure proposed legislation and reforms are actually adopted is by continuing to grow our coalition. Each of you can play an important part in bringing that to others, and I want to again restate Chris Murray's appreciation to Villa Park, City Manager Steve Franks here today for their unanimous support to join the task force. With that, our meeting is.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'm sorry, just
No.
one note for everyone, for the online audience and those present. We do have a task force meeting on October 18th and then December 5th. So my
Okay.
apologies for the incorrect note on here.
Okay, we have one meeting in October and then again in December.
My apologies.
With that, we are concluded. Thank you all again.
Yeah, California doesn't really do oversight.